All right. Do you want a clap uh, like the old school will? All right.
Yeah, I guess when we don't have separate audio tracks, you don't really need a sync point.
That is right. Cool. All right. We'll just go in three, two. Hello, everyone. Mario Blandini here at IX, and I am joined by Allan Jude, a partner of ours with Klara Systems. How you doing today, Allan?
I'm doing pretty good. How about you?
Awesome. Well, we're gathered here today to talk about the open storage era, something that IX is really excited about. And our companies have a partnership where folks who are using open source software and open source storage software can get support from y'all. So let's just talk about what's available. Before we get into that, for those who don't know IX, we are pioneers in open source storage, and we are the company behind TrueNAS, the world's most deployed storage software. Through that, Klara Systems has become a partner to provide support for those free users, and Allan will be able to describe a little bit more of that. But in addition to being the company behind TrueNAS, we are able to invest in that open source project and pursue our passions because we have some customers who want to take advantage of what IX provides, which is turnkey appliances pre-installed with the right software and 24-hour support by some support, so you can get the same experience you might otherwise have with proprietary storage, in this case, with the benefits of open storage. And I'll sprinkle a little bit of that in throughout. But without any further ado, Allan, why don't you talk to us a little bit about how Klara came to be and your role there?
Yeah, so Clara came about based on the need for people that are using open source to have a common touch point to reach out to when they're having trouble. IX was there if you were using TrueNAS, but if you were using just more generic open source software, you wouldn't necessarily have that one place where you could go and not end up having to rely on a mailing list or something to get support.
Right.
So providing that on both the development and support side. So if you're building something on open source, one of the advantages you get is the ability to customize it and add your own bits that you might need to that. And so Clara provides that development piece while also being able to provide support for, whether it's you're running the normal open source software or a customized version of it. We can provide the support and expertise you will need to keep that running and make your infrastructure successful.
So it goes beyond TrueNAS. I mean, you have
Yeah.
expertise in some of the components of TrueNAS, like ZFS and certainly FreeBSD and Linux and other things, right?
Yeah, and so Clara covers the whole stack down to building custom firmware and bootloaders, all the way up through helping you integrate your application with the operating system and dealing with whatever that might be, whether it's a new hardware platform that needs driver support, or just adding a new feature to the operating system, or security features you need for regulatory compliance, or whatever it might be.
All right. Well, that's for all the folks who are doing some role of their own across lots of different open source projects. How about more specifically, where someone who is using TrueNAS but is using the open source version and not buying equipment from IX? How is it that you can specifically help those folks that might be looking for that same kind of support from IX, but we don't offer it outside of our product line?
Yeah, so Clara provides a subscription support service for ZFS on any platform. And with that, you get access to expertise, whether it's just asking for advice and information on best practices, or being like, I'm having this problem, help me solve it. Or, I have this operation that needs to be done, but, it's sensitive, it needs to be done right. We don't want to lose the data. Can you come and do it for us? And all of that. And making sure that, you know, we've seen people run into problems where, they set up their ZFS and it's running, but if no one's taking care of it, it eventually, there's care and feeding that needs to be done. Otherwise, things can go pretty badly, and you can find interesting
Oh,
videos about
yeah,
that on YouTube
that's right.
from popular YouTubers. Um,
Well, we just had a really good YouTube video from Linus Tech Tips. I don't know if you saw that, over 1 million views so far, where they're building their own archive server. They don't need your support per se because let's say they're advanced enough or their
well,
requirements
that
aren't necessarily like enterprise IT, right? Their requirements are more for supporting a YouTube channel.
Yeah, but they had a specific case where they had ZFS on Linux running for years, and no one was taking care of it, and they had one too many drives fail when they weren't looking. And it turned out if they had had a subscription with a company like Klara, where somebody was keeping an eye on it for them and telling them, "Hey, you need to replace some failed disks here," they wouldn't have ended up having to do an extensive recovery operation.
That's right. Well, I understand that they've moved on to a more modern version of software
Yeah.
for an archive system. I'd agree with you, Alan, that if a lot of TrueNAS users, if they're using it in a business, certainly
Mhm.
compared to how they might consume the opposite of open storage,
Yep.
classic storage products that are built proprietary, the cost on those are crazy. And open source economics allows for TrueNAS's value to ring through. IX provides support on the specific systems that we integrate so we can make sure it's the best possible experience. And so, uh, while I'd love for folks to use your free or use your support services on the free stuff, it's really a choice as to what they want to do. I think maybe is it fair to say your offerings over there at Klara are, whether we say to the left or prior to that whole enterprise thing, more developer for sure, as you mentioned, but you'd be happy to support any business as well running this.
Yeah, like we have.
And you give them a little bit more freedom per se than we might in our fixed configurations from IX.
Yeah, so we have customers span the thing from, not very enterprisey all the way to extremely enterprisey. But sometimes, they need something a little different than what you get out of the box packaged appliance. They
True.
need to customize it for a certain use case, or they need to build it a different way, or they just have needs that other things that have to be able to run on the box, or regulatory compliance, or whatever it might be,
Yeah.
and we can help them do that. And then, as you mentioned, we also do customizing work. So we've had companies that's like, there's this feature ZFS doesn't have, and we need it to have. Can you build it for us and help us get that into upstream so that it'll be available in the future for everyone? And mostly so that they don't have the problem of trying to maintain that fork of
Mhm.
ZFS, because ZFS, well, I wouldn't say it's especially fast moving. It very quickly, your technical debt adds up if you don't keep your version of ZFS up to date.
And one of the reasons why we prescribe our TrueNAS software recommendations the way we do for our system. So, what I'm hearing, Alan, there's really ways people can think of you. The first level is if you need development support or you need support for non-development, but for some sort of application use. And when going down that road, the application could be either more development for features or some other customizations or just plain old support, right? If they're looking for that. So
Yeah, and then
lots
the
of things
other
that y'all can offer.
Yeah, and the other thing we do a lot of is performance audits. If you're feeling like your storage system is not being as fast as you expect it to be, we have the expertise to come in there, whether it's BSD or Linux or whatever, to figure out why it's not going as fast as you think it should be. If it's a problem with the application or with the ZFS configuration or the hardware or what, and figure out what that is and get it fixed up for you.
Great. Well, before we transition to some more uh, let's just say thought type things about what the future holds for open source and where it is now, specific to folks using it in enterprise. Um, how do you think TrueNAS works? I mean, you work with lots of different stuff. TrueNAS in general, where do you think its maturity is? Because it's been around for a long time, and we've got now TrueNAS Scale, which is new
Mhm.
as of this year, and version 13, which is in its U1 release now and is going to U2. I just was wondering if you had an opinion on TrueNAS, looking at lots of different open source projects.
Yeah, and looking at the deployments we see, most of the time, TrueNAS is picked because it's so popular and because it provides that graphical interface enough that you can do most of the operations without having to know the deep internals of ZFS or do everything from the command line. Uh, and that gives the power of this open source storage to a lot more people than if the only way to get it was, vanilla ZFS on Linux or ZFS on FreeBSD, and you had to kind of put all the pieces together yourself.
Yeah, I think most folks aren't into science projects like that, at least from an IT perspective. Certainly, anyone who is a developer, open source, TrueNAS is the uh, culmination of several bits of open source into a
Mhm.
turnkey product. And so that's a good thing. When it comes to infrastructure, right? The folks who are coming together and putting these maybe using old equipment or purchasing new equipment, what are your recommendations then in terms of hardware? Because oftentimes I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, people are trying to leverage existing decommissioned hardware, and that may make for a little bit more problematic of a deployment, right? Because the more variables there, the harder it is to put together. What's your experience been there around the types of hardware people are using, and whether or not the old stuff works? Because
Yeah.
naturally, anything newer from a hardware perspective is going to go faster, but TrueNAS runs on anything, to include a lot of older equipment. I'd love your opinion on how people are choosing their hardware.
A lot of the new deployments we deal with, and especially the consulting we do to help people decide how to build stuff, is mostly new. Uh, but even there, there's a lot of options now with, how you can use SSDs to accelerate hard drive based pools by
Mhm.
having, the metadata VDEVs, and just what combination actually makes sense, and spending the money smartly. Because, you can spend lots of money on SSDs and then not use them well and not get the advantage of it.
Sure thing.
Um, and then, you see the same thing with people, repurposing older hardware is fine as long as it's not too old. And, at some point, the hardware uses more electricity than is worth it for the
Yeah,
performance. But,
sure.
um, with storage in the end, hard drives are hard drives, and it's generally been okay. Um,
Yeah.
we've seen
Well,
a couple of different styles of deployment, and but all of
mhm.
it seems to, TrueNAS works with all of it.
Awesome. Well, one quick plug for True Command. It's a software product that can manage a fleet of TrueNAS systems, and it's available for free up to 50 drives. And we have a separate license there. We could talk another time, Alan, about whether or not people should buy IX hardware versus some sort of other hardware. Most of the time, it's super cost competitive, and we'd love to be able to be available for consulting on those same projects that you might be there if folks are looking to press an easy button on something that's had massive testing and is known to work well. But let's
Yeah, that's
transition
definitely like
over. Oh, go
when
ahead. Please comment.
when we build our own infrastructure here, we often are using IX, partly because knowing that when the system arrives, all the hard drives have already been burned and tested, and that we got stuff that's not going to be DOA immediately, or the first couple of hours of the hard drive being powered on is when it's most likely to have problems. The
Mhm.
fact that you guys have dealt with all that for me ahead of time has made all those deployments a lot smoother.
Awesome. Well, hey, while you provide those services to everybody else in the world, you yourself prefer to use the name brand IX stuff for its experience. So that's an awesome um, uh, endorsement of us. And let's use that as a segue to talk more about open source in general, because I think, Alan, that it's not a really tough argument to say that open source, let's just say, seeping into and playing a major role in layers of the data center is just a historic norm. You could pick it
Yeah.
from databases to operating systems to whatever that might be. When all technologies at first, people say, oh, that's never going to work. It's never going to be good enough. I mean, people said that about a lot of stuff. Linux, never going to be good enough. But I think they were looking at it from a different point of view. You having seen all these things, pass, I assume that you agree that it's inevitable that open technology will find its way into pieces of the data center stack where it can add value and do just as good, if not a better job than stuff what you'd otherwise pay for.
Yeah, and we've seen it, like you said, very gradually, starting with databases, things like Postgres supplanting
Mm.
Oracle, but then it became the operating system, and now we're even seeing it getting into lower parts of the network, like the switches running open source
Yeah.
software, and getting more and more the entire data center stack moving to open source, because it gives you that extra flexibility to mix and match better, or to customize where you need to, or even just to have that certainty that it's not going to really disappear from under you. Right? There's always the
Yes.
option to keep it going, or to work with other people that are using it, and collectively get those benefits versus being captured by a vendor.
Well, we certainly love the community aspect of it, and we think that the TrueNAS community has never been stronger. And IX as a company is gaining steam. We're a
Mhm.
medium-sized company with over 200 employees now, starting to see this open storage era start to take off. But let me go ahead and ask you: um, do you believe the open storage era is inevitable?
Yes.
I
And
imagine you would say that. Now the question is, can we as people who say that say make a claim that it's already begun? Because
I would say so.
I'd argue that we could.
Yeah, like whether it's things like TrueNAS getting the first open source foothold in like all Microsoft shops, whether it's as a file server or the backing for Hyper-V or VMware or whatever. We've done plenty of deployments that way where it was the first non-Microsoft thing getting deployed at this enterprise, and it, that foot in the door, and then suddenly there's more and more open source coming, um, through to places where most of the stack is open source, and it's like, well, when it's time to life cycle this stuff, why are we going to keep this one not open source component when we've found that these open source components work better in every way? Uh, so we've definitely seen more and more of that. And especially with storage, when we're starting to look at, you know, thinking longer term, you don't want your storage to be captive. You know, thinking when you get, you're talking about hundreds of terabytes or petabytes of data, transferring that to something else is suddenly a huge burden. Whereas if it's based on something open source, that means you can always, still mount that file system. It's not something proprietary that you're going to have to migrate from. It's something open that you can continue to access no matter what. If
That's one of
something that
those
makes it goes
features.
away.
Yeah, that's a feature of storage that I think, having been around for a long time, in the pre-open storage era, that I think users have been just accustomed to the fact that it's usually some sort of vendor lock-in to a very
Mhm.
specific upgrade path with very specific limits to what they can do and interoperability and all that. And so that was the norm. And I might argue that it's taken longer for people to embrace open source in storage because the stakes are very high for storage. A machine doesn't boot up right, reboot it. If you're using it for testing, ephemeral, whatnot, but data being available and or being able to access it without any data loss, the folks are generally very conservative and risk averse. And so the question I have for you is it still too risky for people to consider it? I could say from TrueNAS downloaders and people who buy the IX solutions from IX, they're finding that it works every bit as good as their existing infrastructure, if not better, plus all the benefits like it's lower cost and you have freedom and flexibility to do, certain things, and the technology is going to be around forever versus potentially end of life, through some proprietary vendor who's profit first. So
Yeah,
what are
I
your
think
thoughts?
Yeah, I think specifically we're about reaching that tipping point where it's starting to go the other way, where using something proprietary is increasing your risk. Because if you hit the end of life on that hardware and something fails and you can't get a spare part, how do you access that data? Whereas if it's something open, different hardware will still be able to access that data, because you have access to the open software that will be able to import that pool and get your data back, whether it's to migrate it or just to keep it running. Where you've seen things like that. Whereas with something proprietary, it can be as much as, if we don't have the exact right RAID controller card to replace, then none of this data is accessible ever. And it's like, well, they don't make that one anymore. Are we gonna like find it on eBay and hope kind of
Yeah, I
thing?
know. And that you're right. That's a risk that people may not think about there.
Yeah,
Um,
where basically the risk curve is starting to invert to the point where not using open source is increasing your risk because now you're tied to this one vendor and that one hardware, and it means maybe you get forced into taking their upgrade path sooner because you don't ever want to be in the situation where we're past the end of life and we don't have a way to migrate this data off. Whereas with something open, you always have more options.
Yeah. And in this case, because it's free and you can get support, bringing us back to the topic of today's conversation, if more people are using open storage software, we'd mo- odds are it's true NAS because it's the most world's most deployed, and in doing that. you don't have to be on your own anymore. It's not like these are science projects that you put into some corner because that they're not ready for using in production environments. While we don't recommend TrueNAS Core to be used in mission critical environments because we just don't want to tell people that, you can offer them support to give them a lot of confidence if they're choosing to go with the free version with your support
Yeah.
to be more confident in deploying that, right?
Yeah, and to mitigate those risks and make sure that they know if something goes wrong, there's someone you can call that's going to be able to deal with that. And it's again another one of the advantages of open based storage is that you also have more choices, right? If you have a problem with a vendor's storage product, you're pretty much stuck with that vendor as the only person who can help you with it because nobody else can even see what's going on inside.
Yeah.
With something open, it makes it a lot easier to get metrics and information about what's happening out of the device in the software and have other people that you could talk to about what's going on, whether that's just other users who have more visibility on what's happening, or uh, being able to have third-party support companies like Klara.
All right. Well, speaking of that, my hope is folks are getting some value out of understanding what some of the options are here in the general open storage ecosystem. We hope that folks think of IX as the company behind TrueNAS to supply hardware. And in cases where that's not a good fit, we obviously want everybody to use TrueNAS all around the world. We're, as a company, we think people before profit. We have a higher purpose in making sure that TrueNAS is going to live forever and that we achieve the zettabyte in ZFS, right? The zettabyte of data freedom.
Yeah.
Are we there yet? No. Will we get there? If we look at the first 20 years and how it's ramped up, you'd arguably forecast that the mix of people using storage with proprietary software on it versus storage infrastructure with open source software on it, that's gonna shift
Yeah.
quite a bit over the coming years. And dare I say that it may become more popular, or at least from a more bits get stored on open storage than are stored on proprietary storage one of these days.
Oh yeah, that's definitely, the trend is there. And as especially as we see the hyperscalers start shifting more and more to needing something open that can scale to numbers that no one vendor could provide. Uh, Between that and just, everybody's got huge amounts of data now. And as more and more people choose something open because it's safer and because it's more cost effective and it gives you more freedom to decide what you want to do with your storage. In the end, all this data is yours and you need to be able to do what you want with it.
Yeah. Well, you
And
hit something important there, Alan. Freedom, I think, has a close connection to the word choice because you talked about open offering lots more choices and the choice to do something. You are free to choose. And our message to anyone who's interested in TrueNAT is download it and use it. If you're looking for support, Klara Systems can be there depending on your use cases and what you're looking for. We've had a lot of folks that use TrueNAS for free for years and then one day become customers because they see that, oh, wow, I never thought of you guys for hardware before, but your quote looks awesome, super competitive, and I get all these other benefits and it comes with support. Great. I go ahead and like that. But this idea that open source storage is a little bit too risky, I'd add that at least going forward, as much gravity as TrueNAS has, and as consumption goes up, and it becomes more of a mix in the data center. Um, uh, it's inevitable that it's going to happen, and really, it all starts with the idea of choice. You may not think that downloading TrueNAS is a good experience, but real quick, you've been with working with TrueNAS for a long time. It's gotten a
yeah,
lot better in terms of the out of box experience, right?
yeah, for sure. And just the- how quickly you can deploy that versus, the lead time with something with the vendor sometimes. It means that, you know, if you need to migrate a bunch of data really quick. We saw some of this at the start of the pandemic. Suddenly, we need to move all this data that used to live in our office into the cloud so we have enough bandwidth to push it out to all of our users who are now at home, not in the office. We need to deploy something now. And that was easy to just throw up a TrueNAS, and now all those files are accessible for all of our users on the VPN without having to worry about, we don't have enough internet at the office.
Awesome story. All right. Well, thanks a lot for the discussion, Alan. Any parting thoughts for those who might be interested in speaking with you? Who are the types of folks we've talked about before, but maybe give a brief recap of the types of folks that are what a good um, use case is for getting your support subscription for TrueNAS.
Mhm.
What that kind of looks like, so folks can understand if it looks like them, and then any other comments you want to make about Klara.
Yeah. So our support subscription provides a block of hours every month that you can use for everything from just asking questions about ZFS and best practices and how to do things through, support when something isn't working the way you want, uh, or even proactive stuff. It's like, we want you to come and check on our server every week and make sure things are right and tell us, hey, looking at the trend, you're going to run out of space in a couple of months. Hard drives take a little while. So you want to get that order into IX soon so that you get the drives in time to grow the pool before it becomes critically out of space. And so everything from just advice through proactive support, where we're managing it all for you and you don't have to think about it. That fits in our support stuff. And we also do engagements for audits, just, hey, we have this setup that we've had for a while. Can you come check it and make sure we're following best practices and things are working right? Or, we're not seeing the performance we'd like, or performance has dropped off after this change. Can you come tell us what's going on and fix that up?
Well, very good. Thanks, Alan, for joining us on this discussion, and thanks to everybody who's looking at this. You can go get more information about Klara Systems. We often, Alan, just get folks on our live chat or on our contact us forms looking for that. We route that to your company and a couple of others that are
Mhm.
in the ecosystem. And so, if folks wanted to get a hold of you all directly, how might they best do that?
Yeah, the best way is just go to clarasystems.com and fill out the contact form and tell us what you're looking for, and we'll get back to you.
That sounds great. Well, thanks a lot, Alan. And I appreciate your time today.
Yes, thank you, Mario, and thanks everybody for watching.
And for those who are part of the community, we encourage you to use TrueNAS. We believe that the open storage era is not just inevitable, but it's already begun. And like a lot of things that you might see, it's hard while in the early phases of something to see the evidence. And it's not really until you can see the evidence that you realize, wow, this has been going on for a long time. So we encourage folks to think about open when it comes to storage solutions. And we at IX are proud to be the company behind TrueNAS, and also happy to have an ecosystem of partners that not only help from a development perspective, but could provide support and consulting services to users of TrueNAS who may not give us money, but like I said before, our passion is to see that zettabyte of data freedom realized. And in doing so, we as a company can be successful along the way. And I think folks will find that we're fun and easy to work with as well, a different flavor, so to speak, of folks that you work with in managing your IT infrastructure. Thanks again, everybody. Mario Blandini on behalf of IX, and we look forward to bringing you other content very soon.
Yeah, you hicked up very at the
All right,
opening.
no, we can redo that. All right. Greetings, everyone. Mario Blandini here at IX, and I'm joined for a discussion today by Allan Jude, who is with Klara Systems. How you doing, Alan?
I'm doing good.
Awesome. Well, our companies love open source, and we're going to get into a discussion not only about how to get support services from Klara, which your company does, but talk a little bit about open source in general, because I assume that you believe this is a good time for folks to be considering this, as data storage is growing like crazy, but budgets and certainly supplies and lead times make that really tough, right?
Yeah, and just, open source gives you so many more options to do it the way you want to do it.
which for some people that might seem a little bit foreign, but we'll go ahead and get into that. Before I let Allan talk a little bit more about Klara Systems, for those who don't know IX, odds are you do, we are the company behind TrueNAS. We are open source pioneers, and we are bringing about what I like to call the open storage era. Now, I know it's just guys talking into microphones, but my hope is during this discussion, you'll not only understand from a practical perspective how you can get support in a lot of different ways if you're interested in using TrueNAS for storage in your environment, but also open your mind to the fact that the choices are available there. And it's cool to see two partners like us who technically compete in the sense that, Allan, before you talk about what Klara does, we at IX, we provide turnkey appliances with TrueNAS, with 24/7 or up to 24/7 support for a user experience that's much like buying traditional storage products from the common large vendors, just usually a lot less expensive by benefit of open source economics. But that's not the entire market. The majority of TrueNAS users use the free open source product, and we are totally happy about that. And that's why we want to have today's discussion. Our companies have been working together for a while. Allan, why don't you describe what Klara Systems does?
Yeah, and we can just edit together what I said already. Perfect. Right. Yeah, you want like the vector files or whatever? Illustrator or okay. Yep. Mhm. Great.
Hey, thanks,
Thank you.
guys. Appreciate it, Allan.
No problem.
Take care.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.